The demon theory. The demon theory says that the reason why, if I'm pushing a box across a table, that it doesn't go very easily because what we call friction. Well, at one point there was what's called the demon theory, and that demons were the actual reason. There was tiny little demons that you couldn't see, but tiny little demons that were trying to keep back the object that was moving. Now, how can you test for it? Well, if you add a little bit of oil, the box on the table, on the surface, then the box will move more easily. Well, how does that work with the demon theory? The demon theory says that, well, when you add oil, you're actually drowning the demons, and so they're not as many demons to push back. Okay? Suppose I took sandpaper and sanded the surfaces. How does that work with the demon theory? Well, the demon theory says that what you're doing is you're crushing the demons, so they're not as, you kill off the demons, and so there are not as many demons to push back. Now the question is, why is this not believed anymore? Why do we have this crazy idea of friction? Well, as with any scientific theory, we can come up with all sorts of different tests, we can come up with all sorts of explanations, but the trouble with the demon theory is that it gets more and more complex. What about wind resistance? Why are you running through the wind? Well, you could go with, well, demons are bouncing into you. I mean, you could always come up with demons can fly. Well, obviously demons can fly. So the idea of things getting more and more complex really goes against this grain of scientific theory. So you want to try to make things, quoting, I believe it's Einstein, you want to make things as simple as possible, but never simpler. So the simplest explanation, which explains all the observations, is probably going to be the correct one. I think it's Occam's razor. Now, again, in crazy theories, let's talk about Canadian license plates. And this is sort of my own pet crazy theory, is the fact that I started out with the only license plates I was seeing when I was doing a lot of driving, were Ontario plates. And so my theory is that Ontario is the only place in Canada that gives out license plates. All well and good. It works for a long time, and then at some point I saw a Quebec license plate. Well, obviously it was a forged license plate. The guy got kicked out of Canada. And so that's why it's there. And the Saskatchewan license plate, well, again, another forgery because that person got kicked out. And again, this crazy theory doesn't make sense because you could equally say, well, the Ontario plates, those were the forgers, and they're the ones who got kicked out. All the rest of them were legitimate. And again, I can come up with an explanation for anything that I see, but it doesn't mean it's right. And ultimately, the simplest explanation is that they're just down visiting. So when you're dealing with any sort of theory, that you start testing it. And that ultimately makes it a scientific theory, is that you can test it. For some of you, you're thinking string theory. What about string theory? Well, string theory is part of my obligation as a physicist is to say string theory is a math theory. It's a math thing because it is not testable at this point. Not testable at all. So as you deal with scientific theories, as you deal with or hypotheses, is that you are testing it. And you keep testing it, and every time you find an anomaly, the question is, was my testing off, or was the theory off? And that becomes incredibly important. And for a lot of the labs that you end up doing, you're going to come up with results that aren't quite what the theory says it is. But in those cases, my personal belief is that there's a flaw in the testing of it, not a flaw in the theory. But then again, I could be completely wrong. Now, the textbook that we're using for Physics 110 could be completely wrong. However, this stuff has been tested. There are theories, there are conclusions that can be drawn from it. We test it. We come out with a lot of experimental evidence. Sometimes you need the multi-million-dollar equipment in order to test it, but we have testing that goes on, and it passes these tests. And so it feels like it's pretty good. And also the other thing, sort of my fault to position, is that we can put a man on the moon with the stuff that's in this book, with the concepts in this book. So I'm feeling pretty good that this stuff is right. But in reality, it's actually just our best guess.